Hey, it's Art from my new microphone. Welcome to my humble home studio here. The time has finally come for me to upgrade my 2015 iMac that you see behind me with a brand new Apple Mac Studio M2 Max just arrived in the mail. I'm going to go ahead and set this computer up, and then I'm going to tell you exactly why I opted for the Mac Studio for all of my music production endeavors. I'll see you soon. All right, I'm back with a slightly different backdrop, a different black t-shirt, and the Mac Studio is all set up behind me. I transferred about 800 gigs of information from my iMac to the new Mac Studio overnight. I went out and got a necessary adapter to hook up my second monitor, as the Mac Studio only comes with one HDMI port, so I had to get a USB-C to HDMI adapter, and we are ready to go. So this video is about first impressions. I will do a more dedicated video on my full review once I've used this computer for a little bit. And before we get started, let's take a close-up look of my desk just so you get a better idea of what I'm working with here. All right, there is the Mac Studio to the corner of my desk. You can see a couple guitars and some acoustic treatment in the background. In the foreground, we have my YSM5 Yorkville monitor, the right one. And if we scroll over right here, we'll see how good my cameraman work is. See my mouse and keyboard, my Arturia Keylab 49 MIDI controller. I picked up a second Samsung monitor. You can see that they aren't completely matched, but they are close enough for my uses. You see I have my Audio-Technica headphones there, the M40Xs, my 2i2, and then of course the other monitor from Yorkville. The first thing I want to discuss when it comes to my decision for purchasing the Mac Studio for music production is my situation here. As you can see from the last shot, I have a fairly humble home studio. In fact, this is a bedroom studio. It's literally set up in a spare bedroom in my house. I'm not running a full flex Pro Tools rig. I'm not running massive sessions. I'm not mixing in Dolby Atmos at this point, and so I didn't need the biggest and best computer for that. I opted for the Mac Studio because it was at the top of my budget in terms of the specs that it offered, and I feel pretty good that it will be relatively future-proof. My old iMac lasted me 8 years, and I'm hoping to get the same amount of time out of this computer as well. At the same time, I'm not a complete beginner when it comes to music production. I do this professionally, and so I wanted a rig that would allow me to work on larger projects and have the power to keep up with what I want out of my music production endeavors, and also my video production endeavors now that I am here on YouTube. That was admittedly a big part of my decision to go with the Mac Studio, was the video production capabilities. But of course, this video is on music production, and so I will stick to the topic of music production for this video. Another big part of my decision to opt for the Mac Studio is that I wanted to stay in the realm of Apple computers. In fact, I didn't even consider any PCs or Windows computers in my decision. I've been using Apple computers since 2010, and I've been using them professionally in music production since 2015, so I wanted to stick to my guns, especially where my main DAW is Logic Pro X, which is only available on Mac systems. Of course, we all have our personal preferences. I've worked professionally on Windows and Mac computers, and I much prefer the Mac computers. They make everything so much easier. The applications are easy to install, easy to use, the plugins are easy to use, and it's just much better for my workflow at this point in my career. Admittedly, I'm not all that computer savvy, and while I know that Windows can be very powerful and customizable, I much prefer Mac because of its simplicity. So I suppose you could say I'm at the top of the prosumer market when it comes to my home studio, and the Mac Studio happens to be in that same range. I had a little bit of cash flow, and so I opted for this computer for my music production purposes. I much prefer working on desktop computers versus laptop computers. I realize that laptops can be set up to act like desktops, but the fact that this computer is going to sit on this desk in this room and not move is a big selling point for me personally. I like having a dedicated space for my music production endeavors, and having this computer dedicated to this space will keep me from moving it around and using it for different purposes that aren't about music or video production. So mobility wasn't a big factor in my decision making. I wanted something that was much more stationary, hence why I went with this one. And of course, I needed something that was fast with a lot of storage and a lot of RAM to run my sample libraries nicely, and something that is nice and quiet so it's not getting picked up while I'm recording. So that's a little bit about my situation and what prompted me to opt for the Mac Studio in my music production. Now let's move on to the specs of this computer. First off, I went with the M2 Max chip over the M2 Ultra chip. Of course, in a perfect world with an unlimited budget, I would have maxed out all of the specs, but alas, I am on a budget, and so I went with the Max 2 chip, which should be plenty to get me through all of my music production and most of my video editing endeavors. And so I opted for the 12-core CPU, 30-core GPU, and 16-core neural engine option. The 12 cores of CPU will be more than enough to run even my largest sessions. I actually pulled one up to test it out. That was my largest session for my previous computer that would crash every 2 seconds or so. And this computer is able to run it without issue, without even coming close to maximizing its CPU usage. The 16-core neural engine isn't really useful for music production as far as I can tell, and the 30-core GPU could become helpful if I'm running any plugins that utilize GPU for their processing. I opted to upgrade the internal hard drive to 2 terabytes of storage. I've found personally that Macs become pretty sluggish if you surpass that 75% capacity rate in their internal drives, and so I wanted plenty of space to not ever really have to worry about surpassing that in my project files, my plugins, and even having sample libraries on the internal drive. I will, of course, be using external hard drives, especially as I grow my sample libraries and my virtual instruments that utilize those sample libraries, but the 2 terabytes of internal storage will again give me that peace of mind that I'm not going to slow down the computer by having too much information on the computer. I was thinking about going even more in the internal storage, but it is awfully expensive to buy up front, and it's actually cheaper, I think, in the long term to invest in external hard drives, which could be used for other purposes as well. I opted to upgrade the unified memory to 64 gigs versus the 32 gigs of the base model. This will help me tremendously when running multiple sample-based instruments in a session, and will help with any multitasking I have to do while doing my music production, such as screen recording for here on YouTube. The M2 Max can be maxed out at 96 gigs of unified memory, and the M2 Ultra can be maxed out at a whopping 192 gigs of unified memory. This is a little bit overkill for what I'm using it for, and again, I wanted to stay within my budget. In a perfect world, I probably would have opted for this, but this is plenty for my situation. I also chose the Mac Studio because of its ports that allows me to interface different equipment with the computer. The front has 2 USB-Cs and a SDXC port, and the back has 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 2 USB-A ports, 1 HDMI port, 1 10 gigabyte Ethernet port, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. So a few of the immediate pros I have for this machine after having used it for about 24 hours or so is that it is very quiet. The fan runs more on than it does off, but again, a very quiet machine that makes it a great choice for recording and music production. The 12-core CPU is extremely fast, and this computer has absolutely no problem running even my largest sessions, those sessions that would cause my 2015 to just crash. And the computer seems to have no issue at all running multiple instances of East-West Opus, which at this point in time is my largest sample-based library that I use. And we can't have the pros without the cons, the first of which is that the components within this computer are non-upgradable. We can't increase the amount of RAM, the internal hard drive, or the CPU, for example. And I think because these components are non-upgradable, they are rather pricey to upgrade upon the initial purchase of the machine. Of course, as I stated earlier, I'm not a super computer savvy person, and so I wouldn't be upgrading these components necessarily, but it would be a nice touch to have that future-proofing built in with upgradable features in this computer. Another small con I have is that it doesn't come with a display monitor, and I may only be saying that because I've only ever bought laptops and iMacs before, but the Apple Studio display monitors that come as an upgrade with this computer I think are very pricey, and then when you factor in that you have to buy separate stands that I think are astronomically priced, it does really add up and was completely out of my budget personally. And another very small con I have with this computer is that there are only 2 USB-A ports. I do realize that these ports are being phased out, but still a lot of my gear utilizes USB-A, so I would have liked to see maybe a bit more of those. Of course, I do have a hub that I'm connecting all of my USB-As to, so it's not really that big of an issue, but again, just a small con that I wanted to mention here. So those are my initial thoughts on Apple's Mac Studio M2 Max and the reasons why I purchased it for music production here in my humble home studio. I will be putting together a video, say 6 months into the future, once I have had time to really develop a strong opinion about this computer and its performance in music production. But I just wanted to make this quick one in order to give you my thoughts and opinions on this machine and the reasons why I purchased it for my studio. If you found this video useful or insightful, I would encourage you to hit that like button and let me know your thoughts on the Apple Mac Studio and its role in music production in the comments below if you do have any thoughts or opinions. If you'd like more information on mixing music, I do have a free mixing guidebook. It will be the first link in the description box down below. Walk you through the entire mixing process from start to finish to help you make the right decisions at the right times. Again, the first link in the description box down below. You can sign up to my newsletter and I'll send it to you right away. If you'd like to hang out with me more here on YouTube, where I do talk about music production and mixing more thoroughly, I would encourage you to check out another one of these videos in the top left or right corner to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.